So I'm now going to go to each of my colleagues here to my left, your right, who have each followed one of the sessions, but again also have a lot of experience from their own work in their countries, to give us, and we're going to have several rounds, so don't feel you have to say everything right now, but so your first impressions of the key messages, let's start with that, and then let's go key messages and what should we do? You know, what are some of the most important things that we can do? And I think I'm going to turn to the audience so we'll keep this interactive, and then we're going to come back for a second round. Hopefully we'll have time on the how, the opportunities for doing this, okay? So try to keep your remarks, to the point, and we'll definitely have another opportunity. And as you go, please, as I mentioned, introduce yourself briefly. Thank you. So Bianca.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bianca. I work for an organization based in Brazil. We are a member of the Brazilian Initiative on Business and Biodiversity from the very beginning. And I'm here representing our executive member, which is CNI. We've been involved, as I mentioned, ever since the very beginning of the global platform, and we are very proud to be part of the group that's trying to help with engaging the business sector. We still have a long way to go, but as we look back, we see that we have come a long way. For the forum, what I tried to do during these 2 days was just to write down the things that struck me the most. So I'm just gonna mention them, and I hope everyone was struck by the same, or we can share. First thing, and I think that was mentioned over and over during the day yesterday, was what we can measure, we can improve. I think this is a strong message, and it made me think on a lot of things that we have tried to achieve over the years in engaging the business sector. And yes, we have to measure, and from then we have to move forward. Another thing that really struck me was 1 liter of water per calorie. That was very interesting to hear because, if you start thinking about every one of us here has to have 2,000 calories per day, that's how many liters of water. So we need to be very careful, and we need to start thinking of how we can look after the water, basically. Businesses can't and won't do anything unless governments create an environment for it. There's only so much the business sector can do, and we will need support from governments everywhere. That's certainly one thing that we all need to agree on. Something else, I'm just then going to pass the word on. We use nature because it's valuable, and we lose it because it's free. I think we can all agree on that, and it's very concerning how sometimes we treat nature, but obviously we depend on it so much. So these are some of the things that really made an impression on me and made me think over yesterday and today, and hopefully for the next months to come. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I don't think it needs.
Okay, thanks. I'm Mangala Yapa from Sri Lanka. I represent the Sri Lanka Business and Biodiversity Platform, which was started in August 2012. One of the first South Asian countries to join the CBD and the Global Partnership. The key message that I took out of this event is that the biodiversity loss is one of the greatest challenges that we all face. A lot has been done, but that is not enough. A lot more needs to be done. And that's where the question of how and what we need to do comes out. Perhaps exchanging and sharing knowledge is critical. I think this event has given, particularly to me, who is quite new to this area, good opportunity in that. Again, the big question is how business can mainstream biodiversity. That would be my key take from this.
Excellent.
This thing.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. To Edouard, please.
Yes, thank you. I'm Edward Miller. I'm the president of the University for International Cooperation, which is a Latin American Caribbean online university. But I'm actually here more for the Biodiversity Partnership with America, which is an 8-country business and biodiversity platform, which our university was instrumental in helping establish back in 2009. We started the coordination work based on an existing project between Panama and Costa Rica, where several companies were involved. And by 2012, we had it officially inscribed as an organization. The biggest challenges on that side are actually how to involve the corporate sector. And most of the time, you'll have the person in charge of corporate responsibility, who usually is a department with less to say on business plans and very little influence on the CEOs. And I'm not saying we should get the CEOs because it'll probably be impossible, but the day we get the finance people working with us in the platform, I think that's the day where we can make progress. Otherwise, there's a lot of gray area between philanthropy, greenwash, and true business plans. And I think that is the biggest challenge right now, getting it into business plans. And a lot of people have different visions. Some say, oh, we cannot touch the corporate sector because, and there's another group of people saying it's enough. We have to enter it. And in the discussion on mining, actually, one of the big questions was actually how to better harness our knowledge and capacity to make informed and timely and effective decisions in the face of cumulative and accelerating change. And that is a reality. We're facing not only biodiversity loss right now, it's all of global change coming together. The agricultural industry using tremendous amounts of pesticides and going the wrong way with transgenes and all these other technologies, thinking that's going to solve adaptation to climate change. And actually, what we're looking out on the ground is not. So how do you put these things together? And we have climate change, we have the ecosystem-based approach, which is there for 15 years. It's not being used by companies, and the tools are there. So how do we get companies to start using these tools? I think that is a very big challenge. And then to be able, at the end, to mainstream biodiversity. And then the partnerships for expanding the work. It is not only what the business is impacting itself, but how it can involve the further communities and other stakeholders into conserving broader landscapes and functional landscapes. And I think that is a very big challenge, especially in the face of climate change. And for that, we need monitoring. We have enough science, but it's not getting used for decisions. A friend of mine always says this is the best documented extinction of the planet. We know exactly, minute by minute, why we're going to go extinct. The science is there, it's all documented, but it's not being used by decision makers. And it's not being used by corporate sector to make decisions. So the short-time profit, the short-time, governments saying we need to increase consumption to revive our economies. The whole principles of the economy theory are wrong. And one of the last things that we discussed in this part of the key messages is, okay, we have the top, and we saw that with, I think it was Jason's talk, we have the top companies which are doing good stuff, and we're working with them. How do we engage with all the ones that are doing the bad stuff, which are responsible for most of the destruction, and are not interested in this? And that, I think, is the biggest challenge. Yes, let's keep on working with these good companies, but how do we get that trickle down into the bad ones?
Very good. Thank you very much. Probably. I would ask you to hold your applause to the very end of this session. Otherwise, we might be here till midnight. But, you can stay. Okay, so Gonzalo, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Gonzalo León. I came from Chile, and I am working in the national initiative in Chile in business on biodiversity. And actually, we launched the initiative 2 years ago in Chile. And the key message going to our experience in Chile is that, as was already talking here, is the business sector is the key to the success of any agreement on biodiversity, but not only the business sector. In the case of Chile or maybe some other Latin American countries, the authorities, because we can appreciate in Chile that the business always do the authority says, and then always the business is asking for clear rules to do offsetting, for instance, and then I think one of the key message, I think from my point of view, because in Chile we used to say, if it is not sustainable, it's not a business, and if it's not a business, it's not sustainable. Then because we are very extractive economy in Chile, then sometime our natural resources is gonna finish, and then we have to try to recover the capital, natural capital, or even to create some other capitals. And then other key message is that it's not only a problem regarding biodiversity, also it's a problem regarding communities and indigenous people in our countries, because there's an opportunity for business to conduce some projects related to shared value or something. And also, some other speaker told it before, but I think it is important to link biodiversity with other important and key issues as climate change. It was discussed in one of the sessions that the climate change measures have co-benefits to biodiversity and vice versa. And then I think these are the most important key message that I can tell you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, we now turn to Mr. Yang Zhao, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Zhao Yang, not Yang Zhao. But I come from China. I work for the Foreign Economic Cooperation Office of the Ministry of Environmental Protection, China. And FECO, the Foreign Economic Cooperation Office of the Ministry is the management and also the operation body of the China Business and Biodiversity Partnership. For information, actually China formally joined the Global Partnership for Business and Biodiversity at the beginning of this year. So we participated in this forum as a formal member, for the first time, and we really appreciate this opportunity for, exchanging with the other country representatives. And we have a big delegation here. We have a 6-person delegation, and this is quite a learning experience and process for us. Very interesting discussions and interactions on this forum, and some very innovative thinkings, just opened my eyes and reinforced my original thinking. For example, the inspiring messages, on the forum, which is very interesting to me, is the development, upskilling, and uptaking of some voluntary standards, some sustainability-oriented voluntary standards, such as the responsible and ethical sourcing platform. It's a standard setting initiative. So the companies, the promising companies and forward-looking companies can take up the voluntary standard, set by this initiative and integrate the ethical sourcing in their decision making, to make the company's performances more sustainable to society. And another aspect of the voluntary standard is, some resourceful enterprises, even set out their own code of conduct. The code, like the presentation made by Unilever, they use their code of conduct to audit. There are thousands of auditors, and to ask their suppliers to take into account biodiversity in their operation and strategy. Of course, this the whole setting of the voluntary standards just reinforced my belief that they can be the push and the pull factors, to inspire companies, to take up, the voluntary standards. Of course, there are the messages brought by the WBCSD, the Natural Capital Protocol, and you even form a coalition. I think the protocol is, of course, is a voluntary standard too. Okay, so I have learned some good messages. If there are some, I can bring from China to, to the audience, is that never forget the industry association and the local governments, and do include them in the national partnership, because they can save you a lot of labor and breath. Because, for example, back in China, the industry association, they usually have like hundreds and thousands of member companies, under the guidance of the industry association. And we have undertaken, we have made the efforts of helping, some relevant industry associations to integrate biodiversity thinking into their, guidelines or into their guidelines. So in the guidelines, requiring companies to integrate biodiversity in their business model. So with the requirement, the companies would approach, the partnership, for technical assistance, that brings us, business. So that's for the industry association. On the other hand, the local government in China, especially for those provinces teeming with enterprises, that are very much export-oriented. The local governments usually have the framework for monitoring and evaluating local companies' performances, from the perspective of environment and from the social and environmental perspectives. And as far as I know, that they haven't incorporated biodiversity into the ME system, by the local government. So we are supporting the efforts of local governments in integrating biodiversity, in terms of risks and potential opportunities into their, ME systems, which is quite applauded by local governments. So that's probably all, for now, because of time. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, and I appreciate how several of the speakers have woven what you've heard here with your own experience, which is also very useful to hear. And it also teaches us every country is different, so we have to think about that as we go forward. Okay, we have two more speakers, and then we're going to have a turn to the audience. So get ready. So Arnaud, please.
Good afternoon, all. I've come from India. My name is Arnab, and I work with the Confederation of Indian Industry and also representative to India Business and Biodiversity Initiative. It's our only national initiative, and it has been started 2 years back, and we have worked progressively over the last 1 year, having around 26 members now, a few SMEs, and also working with various civil society partners as well as NGOs. As a country like India, we are continuously striving towards higher GDP, that means better economy, and so environment plays a very big hurdle when it comes to have a better economy. That's usual the understanding. So the best thing that we are trying to fit is how to go head in head. Also, while engaging business, what should make sense to them, that's our prime concern. So I'll first answer how we engage the business with us, and then I'll come to the key messages that I've collected from the last 2 days from the two sessions, all the sessions, and also my experience that we have gained in my country with all the industries. For engaging with the business, we usually go for showing the benefit that the business gets when it comes to work with biodiversity. And if you put it in right word, it's the business cases. So many companies that we have worked with, we have tried to figure out the business cases for all of them, and that motivated them to go ahead with the biodiversity program. So they're working in their own operation as well as the supply chain. Secondly, also trying to figure out how the policy can help, from the government can help the industries. So that again plays a very key part. One of the most important thing that we have also tried is trying to build more tools which can help the business to clearly understand the impacts, dependencies, help them measure, value, and then take actions on it. And the last thing that could help us further is to come up with more innovative financing mechanisms for the private sectors as well, as usually the companies work with profit and usually go with very thin profit margin most of the time. The key message that I took from the last 2 days and also from my experience is it's very hard for the industry to understand what biodiversity is, because they have a lot of other issues on the plate. It's such as like climate change and sustainability. It's very hard to also delineate biodiversity from sustainability because all goes hand in hand. So it's very hard to make them understand why should they focus on biodiversity. More awareness is required. That's what we felt. The awareness in the industry, among the government, financial institutes, and also the consumers. Top-down approach and bottom-up approach both can help. Financing mechanisms would be a key aspects to touch, because that's where we had a discussion today. And it felt like the right part where we can start thinking about. And finally, a lot of other events, more platforms should be there where all the initiatives can come together, talk about it, and also engage more and more business out of it, because they can understand and take back something more meaningful. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. And last but not least, we have Kirabin Nekar. Again, thank you all also for keeping very brief remarks, and then we're going to come back to you. So, but please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm Kirabin Nekar from the Department of Environmental Affairs in South Africa. I've been very privileged to be part of the early days of the Business and Biodiversity Program, trying to set up operations and systems in place. And I was actually the catalyst for the national initiative, the National Business and Biodiversity Network in South Africa. So obviously the global partnership was a catalyst, or the provisions in the CBD was a catalyst for the national initiatives. The good thing about speaking last in this panel is that a lot of it has already been said. But I'd just like to pick up on one of the key issues that has resonated throughout the 2 days that we've been talking about business and biodiversity, and that's one of scale. There's been a lot of fantastic pilots, even at the local level, at the national level, international level, and how do we actually upscale a lot of these initiatives to actually feed into a community of practice across both the private and public sectors. I think that's one of the key issues, and related to that is one of indicators, because the private sector has a different view to reporting against indicators, and the public sector has different means to report. The one of standards, which has already been mentioned, I think, with respect to standards in the corporate sector, what are the standards in place, what are the reporting requirements, and obviously there's not much mandatory reporting that is going on in terms of governments reporting to, in terms of corporates reporting back to government. And I think all this feeds into to one of the biggest problems that we have, and that is how do countries actually measure growth? And they measure growth through using a metric called gross domestic product. And I think that is the challenge, because even in the one of the opening addresses of the Finnish government, they being the forerunners of the bioeconomy, one of the slides said that there's GDP plus well-being, which obviously means that your GDP is not taking into consideration the well-being or the welfare of society. And I think that's one of the key issues here, because a lot of the initiatives, whether it is successful at a local level or a national level, international level, is all feeding into the way countries report on their growth, and that is GDP. That's the biggest challenge, and I think we need to really address the issue of GDP and the forerunners of the biodiversity economy should actually use this as an opportunity to address the reporting of growth. Another issue that has been also highlighted is one of leadership and decision making. I'm not too sure as to who should take the leadership, whether it is government, the public sector, the private sector, or a combination of both. But I think the opportunity lies in unpacking the leadership aspects of the present leaders, the future leaders, and how we can actually move this forward. So I think there's a really great opportunity in trying to address the leaders of tomorrow in this whole discussion. I think I'd leave the opportunities for last, so thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I'm very impressed by all of the remarks just made, and very few of them overlap, so I think we have an incredible wealth of observations. I wanted to add one, though. I heard a little bit, and I should say that we've also looked through the questionnaire, the responses that you've given us, and we're also culling through that, and we have people who are taking notes. So after this meeting, we're going to take all of this, and it will be captured. But we didn't want to do like a live screen of that because I find that distracting a bit. So I've been taking notes. We've got your notes. One thing I didn't hear as strongly as I expected that I did find in some of the questionnaire answers was about communication. And some of you touched on that. But to me, I always joke, I'm a lawyer by training, but I've learned that communication is really the key. And it's sort of like when you say, you could be as right, you could be absolutely right, but if you don't communicate it well, it doesn't matter. And it's the same with science. You know, you could have the facts, but if you're not able to convince people or tell it to people in a way that they understand in their language, it's just not going to change anything. So I heard over the last 2 days people saying, you know, how hard it is for businesses to understand what is biodiversity, and, you know, why should I care about biodiversity? But if you start talking about the wording in ways that they do understand, and the natural resources and commodities and, you know, well-being and income and, you know, water supply, that makes a big difference. So I think that's one area we really need to think about, not only what is the communication message, but who is the target and also who is carrying the message. Is the message coming from government? Is it coming from NGOs? Is it coming from businesses to business? You know, if you're at a business association, someone raised that idea, and you hear from a colleague, hey, you know, we're doing this, have you heard about this new technique? That will probably be more compelling than hearing it from the outside. So I also want to mention that what I also heard in terms of our own work within the CBD work that is going on is lots of linkages, and COP12 also asked us to put together a global communication strategy, which we are working on. And it's a huge task, and I don't know that we'll be completely finished even for COP13, but we'll have some aspects of it for sure. But one big element is about the business sector. Let's see if there's anything else. I think one other thing I didn't hear as much on was a little bit about government enabling actions, a little bit. But that's, as I've said, I've seen that historically in the climate world as something that's very key. And maybe it's just in terms of where we are with the biodiversity discussion with business, that we're not even quite there yet. But with climate change, you know, you'd have the early adopters moving ahead, and they wanted to get credit for what they were doing. If there was going to be some rules, then they could have, you know, their emission reductions counted, and the less good actors, you know, would not have sort of an advantage. So, you know, having some clear rules of the road, it was mentioned, but I really think that's a key. I like to hear the different things that came out again about trade associations, local government role. You know, what are some of the key partners that we haven't really talked about? So what I'd like to do with the time that we have, we're going to try to, by the way, we have about, I'd say about 30 minutes or so, 35 minutes for this part of the discussion, and then we'll hand it to our gracious hosts to close the session, just so you know our time frame. So I'd like to now open up the discussion. What I'd suggest is that if you'd like to make a point, either if you want to fill in a very short sentence, you know, a key message that you don't think has been captured, okay, just one, not a whole list, please, so we can have some a lot of participation. But I'd really like to move to the next question I posed to you, which is, okay, we've heard some of the challenges, some of the issues. What can we do about it? You know, what are some of the things we should be thinking about? What did you write down in your notes and say, you know, we really should look at this, this, or this? And then we're going to come back for a last round on the how and the opportunities, okay? So let's talk again, if there's any gap in terms of one of the big messages, but also let's start to move into the what can we do. And please, again, state who you are.
We should start now. Yes. Hello, my name is Rasmus Vincent. I'm from a Danish company called Habitats. And I think actually there is a very important aspect that have not been mentioned or touched upon at all. And that is related to the communication that you asked for, because that is aesthetics. I think biodiversity, yes, it is extremely complicated to communicate about biodiversity because it is so complex. But compared to climate change issue, which are even more complicated to communicate about, because dealing with CO2 emission reductions, I mean, you cannot see that there is no longer a ton of CO2 in the atmosphere. That is complicated to communicate. But with biodiversity, you have all of this fantastic, beautiful nature that we saw a little bit of it from Mexico, and that is a very, very strong opportunity to communicate the importance of biodiversity agenda. So I will encourage you to include that in when you are talking to businesses, for instance, to show them the difference between some of the flat lawns that we very often see in urban areas, or the concrete parking lots, and see this is as dead as it gets. Nothing is living here, and then show them just a lush green area and say, this is what we are striving for. And they can easily see the difference, say, of course we want more of those well-functioning ecosystems also where we live. That is a very strong way of communicating biodiversity.
Okay, thank you. Other please.
Good afternoon. Thanks very much for a fantastic day, and yesterday was excellent as well. Very thought-provoking comments from lots of people. The thought that it's provoked in me is that there's been a lot of talk about simplifying the message for business, as if in some way business was stupid. I work for an organisation that employs Matt Roberts, Interserve PLC. We're a UK-based global construction and support services company. We employ 85,000 people in 60 different countries. We do some really complicated things that vary from cleaning supermarkets to maintaining nuclear power stations. That's pretty difficult to do. We understand complexity. We understand challenge. The fact that I'm sitting here and we're thinking about it probably means that we get this. But lots of other people in business get it as well. Businesses, generally speaking, are quite focused in what they do. There's a lot of people competing for messages, a lot of people in the sustainability space competing with messages. I don't think the biodiversity world needs to simplify what it's saying. I think it needs to be clear about its relevance. I think business really understands sophisticated arguments because we have to. We understand change. If you think of that everybody in this room has been through phenomenal change in the last 30 years, business has had to do that as well. We've been successful at doing that. There's quite often a bit of a doom and gloom message, and we don't talk. And I was having a conversation at lunchtime with people about talking about actually the fact that when we solved is an interesting and slightly pejorative word, but when we tackled the challenges of acid rain, we never actually told the world that we'd done that. When we tackled the challenges of ozone, we didn't ever tell the world that we'd done that. It just went away as a conversation piece. We are now tackling climate change, and if Paris is successful, the level of intensity of conversation about that will decline. But we'll never tell people that it was success. We'll never celebrate the fact that we managed to come together as a global community of business and the NGO and civil society and government and solve these problems. There are lots of people who think that these are insurmountable problems that went away but were never solved. We have to be better at telling people when we've solved the problems. We have to be better at saying to business, this is difficult and complex, and actually you're really good at this stuff. I'm quite confident that my business can tackle the challenges of biodiversity that we face because we've tackled lots of equally complex and difficult solutions. We don't need simplified language. We need clear, focused, prioritised conversations.
Okay, thank you very much. Right there behind.
I'm Tania Afri, University of Helsinki, and I have a comment only, not any question or nothing. I think that awareness about biodiversity is missing in our general life. It's like in general, before I came to here, I did not know many things about biodiversity. So it's like consumer awareness is missing in regard to biodiversity. Suppose I am the consumer and we are talking about business, but I am not aware about biodiversity. So it's the kind of comment from me. Thank you.
Yeah, we had Rick from UEBT gave a presentation about that and the awareness that people have. So it's a good point. And when my notes, just so you know, about communication are not only to businesses or with businesses, but also consumers and people. I prefer that word to consumers. Other inputs? How are we going to solve this? What should we be doing? There in the middle, please.
Sorry.
Hi, yeah, Matt Smith, JNCC UK. Just a few points. I've heard a lot about data gaps, and I know I've been going on about data a lot these last 2 days, but I mean, I come from a data-wealthy country, and we are very, very lucky. The problem we have is actually data discoverability, so I think we need to make those clear distinctions. Is it an actual data gap? Or is it we need to be doing more with the information and the data? Like my colleague Edouard said, you know, there is science out there. We need to communicate the knowledge that we have better. I think we need trusted information providers to be able to link that knowledge to the methods and tools, and there's lots of them out there. And our colleague from Trucost said, you know, business is actually getting a little bit hung up on exactly what tools and what methods they need to be using and for what reasons. We need to be able to demonstrate the benefits better for the using those tools, why they need to be doing this in an appropriate manner, again, through coming back to communications, appropriate to the specific audiences, not just going, it's going to give you opportunities. Okay, well, is the opportunity the same for an agricultural business? Is it the same for a bank? Is it the same for an apparel company? No, it's not. That communication needs to be adapted for each other. And I think also that we need to be doing a little bit more about exposing the impacts of biodiversity. I used an example of a friend who would only ever drink bottled water. And she turned around to me and said, well, it all gets recycled, it's fine. I was like, well, you know, have you thought about the impact of how it's made, where it comes from, is the shipping? And it's not, it's very easy for us to sit in here, people in the know, but people out there that aren't exposed to the thinking and to the messages that we are, you know, preaching to the choir a little bit in here, and we are very, very bad at doing that in in our sector, we need to really start to expose the impacts on biodiversity more than just, showing Borneo on fire. Unfortunately, those messages are falling on deaf ears. They really are. I mean, since 1990, biodiversity loss has continued. We need to really, really think about how that message is coming across and who's communicating it and to who. And I'd just like to finish off, really, we're all human beings, whether or not you're a CEO of a bank or whether or not you're somebody who's cleaning the supermarket. Everybody inherently loves the planet and they want to do the right thing. So that's what I would really take away from. Just make sure whenever you're talking to anybody, appeal to them as human beings and say it's not about profits and loss and all of these fangle-tangle tools. It's about reaching into your soul and thinking, right, is this the right thing we should be doing for our company, for our organisation, for our government? And that's what I would implore.
Okay, thank you very much. I should have mentioned I started my career on Wall Street. Now, so I've gone the whole gamut. But, okay, that's very helpful. I might now shift it a bit back to the panel to have another go at this, to talk about solutions and opportunities. One I just want to come back to, which is very important that we focus on, given that it's coming up next year and we're going to be very involved, and many of you, I hope, will be very involved, is COP13. And we heard about Mexico and what will be happening there. And I just want to reiterate how the general categories of outcomes that people are talking about. The first that everyone's very familiar with is having actually decisions by the parties. There'll be a negotiation, there'll be different topics on the agenda, and among those topics will be, again, mainstreaming is like the key focus of the work. So there'll be mainstreaming in particular sectors, including agriculture, forestry, fisheries, and tourism. So many of the discussions here touched on those. There are also a lot of sectors that are not in that list, including mining, for example. But we'll also have discussions outside of those four. There'll be discussions about cross-sectoral policies and tools like subsidy reform or perverse incentives, positive incentives, development planning, national decision-making, and how that's done. And there will also be discussion around the business work. So there'll be most likely another decision on the work of the parties, of the contribution of businesses, and also the support that the Secretariat can bring for the business sector broadly. So there'll be COP decisions. That's category one. There's also going to be a ministerial meeting, two days, with the plan is to bring in ministers from different sectors, the ones I just mentioned, along with environment ministers. They are planning to have a political statement, a declaration, and that is another opportunity. What in your wildest dreams would you want ministers to come together from around the world to say that could help advance the agenda that we've been talking about? And last but not least, there will also be an opportunity for voluntary pledges and commitments, initiatives to be launched, not only by governments, but by different partnerships, nonprofit groups, businesses, etc. So we have really a wide variety of opportunities for us to use the COP, in addition to the side events and parallel events that we have, the business forum and other opportunities. So really think about it. What can we do? What message do you want to send for us to start to work on and try to develop for the meeting in Mexico? Well, I think I'll just go right down the line again. Bianca.
I agree with you. I think we have an array of opportunities ahead of us. I think the business sector, okay, we are kind of divided and everyone else is doing their own thing in their own country, in their own areas. However, I begin to see an interest of the sector itself into finding new ways to do business and still guarantee that business is going to go on, because we only have so much resources. And I think it's becoming clearer and clearer, not for us here, the choir, but out there businesses are starting to notice these things, and they are looking for ways to work better with what they have, do more with less, and so forth. I think we need to do a better job into communicating, as you mentioned, in terms of, okay, there are all these tools and mechanisms and studies and case studies, and it's everything out there, but how can we make it easier and more available to companies that don't know where to begin? And I think that the Global Partnership can play a role in this, and compile all this information and have a channel where people can go and look for solutions, or even contact other members and start talking between themselves. There was something that was mentioned yesterday. It was, how do we connect organizations that are doing good work but don't talk to each other? And I think that would be a key point here. So this is something where we can contribute, and I think we should really. And whether it's academia or NGOs or businesses, we're all trying to achieve the same here, which is somehow preserve something of what's left and still stimulate businesses to keep growing. We don't want anyone to stop. We want everyone to move forward, but still look after the planet and preserve whatever we can.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you. I think the need to address the biodiversity, loss of biodiversity, is quite apparent and it's felt. But how do we transform this need into an opportunity so that the business is going to take something really useful for them to do something? So I think that will be a big challenge. How do we transform this awareness and the need that we have into a real business opportunity? I think that comes maybe through the collective knowledge and that we can put together, and the right kind of communication. And perhaps in the same backdrop, like in many other instances, the governments also can play a big role by creating the right kind of environment to make some kind of encouragement or rather inducements towards that, so that the businesses won't keep it away. Because majority of I think one thing I heard yesterday is 70% of the food production is by small and medium enterprises. So there's a big, larger group of corporates that needs to come in. It is not only the big corporates, but even the small and medium. So I think there's a big role for the government also to play, perhaps coming into a common understanding and creating that kind of environment.
Okay,
thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay.
I'll start with the communication issue because I think it's fundamental. And it has to be in many, many diverse languages and forms, depending on who you're talking with. And I can just give you an example of a personal experience I have. About 3 weeks ago, I was talking with the tourism sector in Costa Rica. And they were all worried about sustainability indicators and all this. And I said, well, you know something? What is the main challenge we have? And everybody came up with water. And biodiversity is by far the biggest threat, above nitrogen and above climate change at the moment. It probably will be a link, very close link with climate change accelerating in both ways. And I said, well, you know something? If Central America already lost 52% of its biodiversity, according to a report in 2008, and we're losing our beaches due to erosion, and tourists come to Costa Rica because of biodiversity and beaches, and there's no biodiversity and no beaches, what are you going to be doing in your industry? And for the first time, the industry reacted and said, we need to get engaged. They hadn't tied the fact of biodiversity loss affecting their business. They do know it because the guides have taken out the red jeans, the blue jeans frog out of their guides because you don't see it anymore. They're gone. And they're very aware of this. But it doesn't get to the company side level. The field people know it, the guides know it, but the companies don't really bring this in. And then another thing, I think, which could be a very important thing, and this I'm mixing the how and the what for the next COP, is I think we can move forward the day governments realize that climate change and biodiversity should not be in the Ministry of Environment. They should be in the Ministry of the Presidency or the Ministry of Finance. And that day we will get decisions. As long as they're in the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Environment in Costa Rica is the worst funded ministry together with culture in the country. And our ministry has double the budget of all Central American ministries put together, environmental ministries. Okay? So you can imagine the governments of the rest of the Central American countries, the power that the Ministry of Environment has is zero. So as long as climate change is within that ministry, and as long as biodiversity is within that ministry, agriculture is not interested. Tourism is not interested. And I think that's a very, very key thing that we had to get a resolution to bring this into the real stage at government level. And then just to not to use up too much time, we saw a lot of things on clarifying what has to be done. And yesterday we had one company saying we need to avoid offsets. And we had another company saying, well, yeah, we lose biodiversity, then we mitigate and whatever, and then we pick it up a little bit. But that is compensated because the company is giving scholarships and building roads. I'm not sure we're still at a stage where we can allow that sort of trade-off. I don't think so. I mean, biodiversity is so scarce now that I don't think companies should have the right to do that type of thing. And that is the civil society who has to play a role. And so how do we get massive information out to the third largest country in the world, which is Facebook, with 1 billion inhabitants? Okay, and that billion inhabitants is the top of the triangle. Those are the ones we have to get to. And we have the networking capacity through Facebook to do that. So I think how we actually, and what is the problem? A lot of the people who are in my age, and we can see it there, don't really tweet, don't use Facebook, don't use these instruments, and that is how the world is moving forward. So we need to get young people involved that can do this, 19, 20-year-olds, and really start a global campaign to convince 1 billion people of the importance of biodiversity. And then we'll have companies comply, I think.
Thank you. Well, I think all of us are young. That's how I think.
I feel very young.
Please.
Thank you. It's difficult to add something else after your comments, but I only would like to point that maybe in some countries used to lead some special productions or things. For instance, in Chile, we are miners, and maybe the COP is an opportunity for some countries can show the best practices and their own business, and some countries can lead what they are doing in forest, agriculture, or mining, for instance. And also, I went back to one of the notes that I took in the sessions that's regarding with the financing, that says the financial institutions face potential risk from financing companies with production in water-stressed areas. And then also is an issue that could be point in the COP that the water is other problem that is very related with biodiversity and then can be taken.
Thank you. And just to reflect on something you both said, which is in terms of communication, and I think from the audience, also from the audience, there's just some reverb, it's funny, is communicating in ways that the target person or entity will care about. So in other words, if you're talking about water, or dollars for tourism, because when we made the link in the discussion on the SDGs, and the good news is, in the water goal 6 of the SDGs, biodiversity and ecosystems are in there, because there's language that talks about how you have to make sure that you restore and maintain the ecosystems that provide the water. It's like, oh yeah, where does water come from? So very good points. Please.
So in China, we have already seen some changes, So you can say that, these changes might lead to, kind of solutions or opportunities at different levels. In China, the Central Committee of the Communist Party, of course, we are a socialist country. We have this called the ecological civilization outlook which is guiding, China, in terms of development for a decade, something. So this eco-civilization outlook, is, has based, biodiversity, ecosystem services and functions. I believe that it has drawn a lot on the environmental conventions like CBD, like climate change framework. So at this level, this is a top level, and the businesses, the enterprise community should understand what, eco-civilization outlook implies, So at the second level is the legislation level. We have the new environmental law, which was newly revised and implemented just at the beginning of this year. This law specifies, that no companies should breach the maximum line of emission, within a certain territory, and not breach the bottom line of eco-function and services. These are the terminologies that are pretty new to the business world. And, these laws should be translated into, kind of language which is understood by the enterprises. But I'm talking about, the changes, at the legislation level. Next level is the institutional arrangement level. We have this newly established organization, the top decision-making organization in China is called the National Committee on Biodiversity Conservation. It has 25 ministerial members and chaired by the Vice Premier, meaning that China has already changed its mindset, the biological and natural resources are managed by different ministries and departments, such as land use, agriculture, forestry, husbandry, fishery. But now they have been all together, put together and all led by this national committee. Of course, the Ministry of Environmental Protection is the leading ministry on this national committee. So this is the level of institutional arrangement. We have already seen, some positive changes. Next is we are seeing a good trend of, the industry associations, integrating biodiversity into their guidelines, guiding, instructing the member companies, to perform, to become eco-friendly, the sort of thing. And also, I already mentioned local governments, they monitor and evaluate the environmental and performances and social performances of their the companies. They jurisdict, and such ME system already began to integrate, biodiversity ecosystem, those new implications into the system. And we also see, at this level, and next level is the company level. We already see many CSR reports. The companies are required, are encouraged in China to issue their annual CSR report, and we began to see that, biodiversity and ecosystem services, those terms are already in the reporting. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Some other good ideas. By the way, on the institutional mechanisms, I can also say a little plug for our host country, because I know that Finland has, from many years, I think from the beginning of the Rio Convention, from the Rio meeting, created a biodiversity council in its government, and that's been very helpful for their work. Please.
Thank you. To come with the solution, what I feel is it's what even our environmental minister also says, which is technology is the answer for most of our problem. And so we need better technology because we cannot stop the growth. So we need technology to also help us face the problem that we are facing. That comes at a bigger level where you can help. And secondly, knowledge, collective knowledge, where all various streams come together, such as scientists, technology, economists. They all come together to find solutions, how to help industries, and as well as human being as a whole. As we work, at least to engage business, it's mostly the business cases because without profit, nothing makes sense. So we need to find out how it makes sense to them. And that's what we are trying to do. And lastly is the communication, which has to be more clearer and better to get them engaged. Thanks.
Great. Last but not least, Kiravan.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I think, looking at the opportunities, the SDGs is obviously a missed opportunity. 193 somewhat heads of state adopted the SDGs. And even the Pope as well endorsed the SDGs and had something to say about it. So obviously, from the biodiversity sector, we need to actually look at the value proposition, not only for those specific SDGs, explicitly speaking about biodiversity, but across all 17 goals. I think this is where the opportunity lies in terms of the value proposition of biodiversity. I mean, this is happening at a very high political level, and obviously business takes the lead from governments. We need to actually try to mainstream the biodiversity agenda onto the WTO, the G8, the G20, and I think from that, you have this cascading effect down to national governments. And I think it's also a responsibility of the corporate sector, the private sector, to look at these opportunities, to look at these political levers, and to harness them and use the skills and innovation from the private sector to further the agenda. So that in that is where the opportunity lies. I think, and also the synergies with the other platforms like climate change. Again, and the sustainable development agenda is obviously clear. We cannot approach the problem of biodiversity in silos. It's just not working. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I'm glad you mentioned the SDGs. No one mentioned philanthropy. I mean, one of the hopes of the SDGs is that the philanthropic community, like the Bill Gateses of the world, the foundations who are really focused on development issues and poverty, will also now be linking that with biodiversity. I mean, biodiversity goal, look at Target 15.9, I'll make a plug for that, which says it basically mirrors Target 2 of the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity, and it says that there should be integration of biodiversity into development plans and processes at the national and local levels. So it's very strong. Edouard, I'll only just please one tiny second.
Very short. If we do a reality check, we're past the opportunity to achieve sustainable development. We lost it, at least according to the Brundtland definition. Okay, there's no chance for us to achieve it. The planet has been destroyed beyond. So we need to go into a regenerative process. And that requires working on the 6 axes: economy, environment, culture, society. And probably the most important one is spirituality. And we are not linking spirituality. And spirituality is the only thing that can make a person change. And I'm not talking about religion. So if you ask me to choose between SDGs or the Laudato Si from the Pope, I choose Laudato Si. If you look at goal number 2, eliminating hunger, if you look at the actions, it says increase exports from food exports from developing countries. That is what got us into the hunger problem. So it's technocratic solutions that are going to make us get deeper into the problems. It's good that they're there. I'm not saying they're not bad. They're good. But the solutions are from technical people, have no contact to humans, from the heart side. And I think if we're going to solve this, it's going to be from the heart and not from the wallet. And unless we do that, I don't think we'll ever get the message across.
Well, actually, the Pope, in his speech to the General Assembly and to the heads of state, talked about that and talked about it has to come from the heart. So I am glad to hear the human element in there. I'm more optimistic about the SDGs because I think we need all these different tools. But thank you for adding that because no one had mentioned that till now. So I think we're going to have to wrap up. So I'm sorry I couldn't come back to the audience for one more round, but You've had a chance to also give us your feedback through the questionnaires. I really am just struck by the incredible inputs you've all brought. Seriously, it's just been so varied, and I had already my own thoughts, but you've really added to, I think, what we can take from here. And we're going to have one last session now about next steps. Yes, Edda.
Use the microphone, please. Yes. This came to me after Arnbad told about technology and finance. We haven't talked about cooperation, North-South cooperation, South-South cooperation, and cooperation agencies are stuck in climate change too. So we have to go through the message to cooperation agencies too.
No, thanks for adding that. I sort of had that in my thoughts of technical and scientific cooperation, but you're right to mention it. But yeah, and so for COP13, we're going to still need to glean from this what we can do there, but we're going to have a meeting later today with the partnership. There's a few workshops tomorrow, so we'll be speaking with many of you. If you have additional ideas, I hope there's a way, and I'll ask our hosts, to get additional ideas that we couldn't capture in these 2 hours about ideas for not just COP13, but what can be done, in various forums that we have. So now I would like to welcome you to please give a round of applause to our great speakers. Thank you very much, really.